AA Beyond Belief is a podcast by, for, and about people who have found a secular path to sobriety and Alcoholics Anonymous. Our guest for this episode is Sarah Elizabeth from the Sober Gratitudes podcast. Now, I'll tell you, this isn't a typical episode for AA Beyond Belief because Sarah doesn't identify as either an atheist or agnostic. In fact, she describes her experience as spiritual, and she attributes her sobriety to a higher power which she identifies as God. Now, that being said, this is a truly amazing person you're about to meet. She has an inspiring story, and she's my friend and also a friend of AA Beyond Belief. I enjoyed our conversation very much, and I hope you do as well. So Sarah, welcome to AA Beyond Belief. How you doing?
Good, thanks. How are you today?
Oh, I'm doing great. Good to have you here.
Well, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I always find it's helpful for my sobriety when I have the opportunity to share my story. It reminds me where I came from and where I am today, and allows me to be grateful in remembering where I came from and the changes that have come in my life that are amazing. So thank you for giving me this opportunity to serve. Well, I began drinking at a young age. I didn't think I was young. I was 14, and I just fell in love with the feeling of the alcohol once it really entered my bloodstream, and it numbed some uncomfortable feelings that I had been having most of my life. As long as I can remember, I was always a very anxious person. I also experienced some traumas before I was 14, and I think that drinking allowed for an escape. I didn't see it then. That's something that I clearly see today. So from the age of 14 until I was 39, my life really was me and alcohol, and us conquering the world together. But, as most people know who are in recovery, the alcohol ends up kind of turning against us. So that's exactly what happened for me the last 2 years before I finally found the rooms of AA. But everything I did in my life revolved around drinking. I had found my life partner when I was 14, and I loved it. I loved drinking. I loved partying. I loved that social scene of drinking and smoking cigarettes and just being wild and crazy and with my girlfriends. And I dated men who drank, usually older men who drank, so that I could get alcohol more easily before I was of age. So it was really just, if I wasn't drinking, I was thinking about drinking. In my youth, before I went to college, I drank on the weekends, with boyfriends and close girlfriends. And I wouldn't say it was a huge problem in my life at that point, because I think I just thought I was drinking like everyone else was drinking. And so I didn't really think of myself as having a problem, but I certainly knew that I loved it. And I didn't think there was anything wrong with loving drinking. I went to college and, was 7 hours away from home, and really just hit it hard. I quit doing activities that I had formerly done, growing up, under my parents' roof. I was, doing activities outside of academics. And I was a very, well-rounded youngster, but I also found myself very anxious in the classroom, and I would have panic attacks, and always very self-conscious and watching other people finish tests before me and feeling like I didn't understand some classes, and was just very, didn't want to ruffle any feathers because I lived in a household with a sibling who had a lot of, at the time I felt like he had struggles that were more important, and they were paid more attention to. And so I didn't want to cause any more problems with what I was experiencing. What I know now is that I was dealing with undiagnosed ADD and anxiety and depression. I didn't understand that, or didn't come to learn that until I was in my early 40s, when I was in early recovery, when I started to, seek out help for various parts of my life that were, not going so well. And so in college, just to backtrack to college, I spent most of my time there drinking. I skated through. I don't know how I got the grades I did, but I did drink heavily. I found myself, I think, at that point being, I went into college a relatively confident teenager. But then I think the combination of heavy drinking and just being with the wrong people who weren't, the right kind of people to spend time with, I realized that my self-esteem was starting to take a hit. And I relied heavily on finding, partners who would kind of put me up on a pedestal and kind of obsess over me. Like I wanted them to, love me and only want to be with me all the time. And if they didn't, then I became very needy, and I became very lonely, and I became very manipulative, and to try, I was very selfish. I needed love and attention, and I wanted to be the most important person all the time for whoever I was dating. And also with the girlfriends I spent time with, I found myself, I was always very jealous. I was very, I felt I was always in people's shadows. And so a lot of, character defects I came to find out when I went through the program of recovery in the big book, as designed. I was really able to understand the patterns of relationships, of my humanness, and alcohol just kind of fueled all of that, right? And alcohol was my solution, and it numbed a lot of, trauma of my youth. I did experience, emotional and sexual trauma, and so the mental health, was an issue that was, not addressed. So, alcohol just continuously, helped me in those areas. And so it was just always the solution to every problem I had. It was also just the way I thought you had fun. Like there was no other way I could have fun, but to drink, and to party and go to, any event that I went to. If alcohol wasn't involved, I just felt like it was stupid. I didn't want to be involved in anything that didn't involve alcohol, and I would just get resentful if there wasn't alcohol there. So, at this point, it was, by the time I graduated college, I, had to move back home. I couldn't afford to live on my own. This was in like the mid 90s. And I had been diagnosed with a chronic illness, a vestibular disorder called Meniere's disease. And I was very angry about that. And the doctor told me that I should not drink at all because of this condition. And that made me very angry. So I drank more, which is like, right, the logical, response to, made no sense. I just, was my only knowledge and understanding of how to cope with anything. So, I went through at that point, in my 20s, I ended up living at home and really felt like I couldn't drink the way I needed to drink living at home with my parents.
Were you beginning to think in your 20s that were you becoming aware that maybe it was a problem? Were you thinking about it at that time? I mean, that's when it really started hitting me, about the age of 19.
Okay. Yeah. I was, I think I was around 19 or 20. And I remember there was a time, actually, I don't think I've ever shared this, but in the 8 years I've had in sobriety, and I went to a spring break event with some girlfriends in college. And I remember I was with them all, and there was this moment while we were all so intoxicated and we were just being silly and goofy at these like reggae bars and whatnot. And I ended up just like separating myself from them. And I think I was feeling like they weren't, again, like that feeling like I was not important in the crowd, in the group of, even though they, I was included in this spring break event, I still didn't feel like that I was important. And I felt, such self-loathing and self-pity, and felt like that I wasn't smart like they were. And I wasn't, so I remember at one evening I separated myself and I walked out onto the beach, and I can remember I was talking to my grandmother who had passed, and I knew she had alcoholism and was never recovered, never got into recovery. And she died of breast cancer when I was 13. And I remember I talked to her. And I said, I was talking about my drinking with her, that I wasn't sure if this is the way I should be going. And, it's interesting that that question you asked me, prompted that memory that I really haven't thought about, ever.
Yeah.
And so that's really, I guess one of the seeds that was planted, because I know there's a lot of seeds planted along my lifetime. Well,
that's why I find that so, well, when I first I guess I hit bottom and finally got help, what really blew me away was when I would think back about moments like that. For me, it would be like my brother telling me I had a problem, my employer telling me I had a problem, on and on and on and on and on. And that I just couldn't see it, that I might think about it for a little while and I'd say, no, it can't possibly be. I'm just going through a phase, Yeah.
Well, it's interesting, John, because, I was such a good secret keeper, because of the abuse. My abuser also drank and, threatened me not to tell anyone. And so I had to keep that secret as well. Today, those secrets, and those are my abuser's secrets now. They're not my secrets any longer. And I have no shame over it. So yes. And so anyway, so because I was such a great secret keeper, no one knew how significantly my alcoholism had progressed over the years, and even my husband. My husband is an amazing man. I've been with him for 25 years, and I met him kind of at the best of, when I was at the best place of myself. Like I had kind of cooled the jets, my drinking. I wasn't really drinking much at all when I met him, and I was involving myself in an activity, in theatrical activity, because I was really into that as well. And so I met him and I wasn't drinking. And so I feel like I was kind of like, he met me when I was kind of true, like the most authentic Sarah, like free of the, those character defects that really kind of, get very pronounced, when we're actively drinking and we're not in any kind of program. But then, of course, with any alcoholic, there gets to a place where, you get comfortable in a relationship. And then I was, we were going down the road of looks like we're going to get married. And I was really excited. I wanted to have children. And so, I, basically, we, towards, after a couple of years together and then we got engaged, I felt myself kind of like, and I can see this retrospectively. I felt myself kind of like turning back into that really low self-esteem, being resentful of the fact that I wasn't the center of his world. He's just he's a normal guy. He's not an alcoholic. Like he has activities like, doing things that,
It's amazing too how we can marry normal people. My wife is completely normal and well put together. It just it amazes me.
Yeah, like I just couldn't believe, like, why aren't you putting me first in your life and quitting everything else in your life so that you can, hold me up to the world and saying, look at this wonderful, amazing woman married, like, and and strutting around, saying, look at the, I was searching for, a self-esteem in other people, and I was starting that pattern, that I had actually discovered in my sex inventory. I finally understood my patterns, and those patterns started to creep up again with the healthiest man I'd ever been in a relationship with. And anyway, so he, I think we fell in love with each other. We loved each other. We still love each other. And, and he, bless his heart, I had this medical condition that he was so compassionate and supported me regarding. And he didn't think I was, he knew I liked to party, but, the severity of my drinking really didn't pick up until after we had our third child. And it was about, I would say it was a year after we had our third child. I was doing a lot of drinking, like doing the whole mommy drinking culture stuff. And before that even became like kind of a saying,
right.
Because my sons they're teenagers now. And so, anyway, so I loved the fact that I could find other moms who drank like I did and had young kids, and, two of my kids have special needs. And so we would kind of like, what was me, this is so hard. And okay, we deserve to drink, any kind of, excuse I could get to kind of hide the fact that I really, at that point, really knew I loved drinking so much so that it was maybe not normal. And I ended up, it was, I guess, so a year after my youngest son was born, I was drinking so heavily and so much so, and dangerously, and putting my kids in danger as well, that I was resentful that nobody knew. But
right.
How could I even know? Because I was keeping it a secret, like,
yeah.
So it was just like, I was resentful that people couldn't read my mind,
right.
So that's silly. And so I ended up quitting on my own for 4 months. And after 4 months, that felt kind of clear-headed. I was enjoying the fact that I wasn't having hangovers and throwing up so much. And I ended up picking up again. And that was in 2010, May of 2010. And then for the next 2 years, I just, during those 4 months that I quit, my disease really progressed rapidly. And so when I picked up in May of 2010, I became a daily drinker. And on the weekends, I would start as early as I could. And then in May of 2012, I had a rock bottom dream, very, very lucid, very, very literal. And it would take some time to tell you the dream. It was a very long dream. And the dream, the end of the dream, it was like this journey that I was on. It was a very, very, chaotic and unmanageable and dangerous journey that I was on in this dream. And at the end of this dream, I was brought into a glass chamber, like an elevator, and which submerged me into a vat of liquid. And I was the only one in it. And so everyone who had been in this vat with me had exited and then began to just be spectators of me alone in this dream that I ended up being submerged into a vat of liquid. And then I woke up gasping for air.
Oh my God.
Because I was completely submerged. I was literally holding my breath while I was sleeping.
Oh man.
And I woke up and I knew that it was alcohol.
Wow.
It wasn't water. It was alcohol.
Right. Wine,
in particular, Pinot Grigio. And in fact, if I really rack my brain, I can tell you the brand. That was the first time I felt completely defeated, like exhausted. The sentence, "I'm so sick and tired of feeling sick and tired," popped into my head.
That's really interesting. I have never heard a speaker ever relate that it was a dream, that prompted them. That was their moment, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
and
really
I've had
interesting.
several. I have several. Like we could do a whole other episode on all my spiritual awakening dreams that Anyway, so the dreams that I have, I thank God for. My higher power gave me the gift of having dreams that are messages from my higher power. And I had dreams before I got sober that I didn't pay much attention to, and this one, for some reason, it was pretty much like,
wow, that's
punch
incredible.
in the face.
That's incredible.
Okay, the God saying, you are drowning yourself in
So
alcohol.
Did that prompt you to go seek help? Did you seek help shortly after that?
That same day. What happened, John, was just a miracle. What was actually the first sentence that popped into my mind when I woke up was, before anything else that I thought, was a thought that I never came up with on my own or thought of before. And it was, Google local AA meetings. So by the time I got downstairs, which took a while because I had to throw up and get my done and do what I normally do every morning. It was a Tuesday morning, because, getting hammered on Monday nights was just part of my life. And I just happened to, have that dream early in the morning. May 8th, it happens to be my late beloved grandmother's birthday as well, who I was very close with. And anyone in my family who knows the relationship that we had, they would say, "Oh, Sarah was always her favorite." Even she struggled with her relationships with her own children, and so not my father really, but her other children. So it's really amazing that it was on her birthday. And at the same time, a litter of puppies were born that we were in line to get. And so my dog was born the morning of my rock bottom dream. So she's my sober pup. She turns 8 the day of my rock bottom dream. It's not my sober date because I did have a couple of relapses then, but anyway, so I went to an AA meeting that day of the rock bottom dream, and I sometimes I get kind of emotional when I think it's I went to a meeting in my hometown, the town where I was raising my children in too, because I thought, oh, no one would ever that I know would ever go, because like how shameful,
right?
You go, so no one. I thought I was so smart, like I'm gonna go where nobody, like everyone from like other towns or states will probably be at this local church. And I walked in. Well, before walking in, it was like all biker dudes with tattoos. And I'm like, is this a men's meeting? And I don't know why, I just knew that, because I didn't see any women. I'm like, I don't know if I'm at the right meeting. And they were all laughing and smiling and smoking cigarettes and sitting on their motorcycles. And they saw me. And I think they knew I was new.
I've talked to more than a few women who've had that experience. They go to their first meeting, it's all guys. It's like,
well, what's amazing is that, they said, no, come in.
Yeah.
And they were, bless their hearts. Like, and I mean that in the most, real way. They led me in and said, no, you're in the right place. Come on in. This is your first meeting. Okay, come in, meet some amazing people. No, there'll be women here. They're coming.
I promise you they'll be here.
Yeah. Well, no, at that point they were making phone calls because it was a meeting that didn't typically have women, even though it was.
That's good.
Yeah. So I went in there and I knew I was home. I was crying the whole time, and it was like, okay, this is home.
That's what AA does best.
Mm-hmm. And I heard them speaking my language, and I thought, wait a minute, I coined that phrase. Sick and tired of being sick and tired. Like that's my baby. I think that. Like, who are you? I was like mad about it too, which is so funny.
That's the magic of AA, as far as I'm concerned. It's that connection that we make with people from the very first meeting. I felt it too. But that sounds like a great group. I mean, I hope they turned out to be a great group. It's nice that they did what they did.
Yeah, I never went back to that meeting because they directed me to. Well, what ended up happening, John, is this is another higher power moment that I didn't realize was occurring. Was that I believe phone calls were being made, but in the last 10 minutes of the meeting, a woman came like the doors just like went slamming open, and she came in, and I saw her talking to one of the men that had kind of clung to me to keep me there. She and he were talking like sidebar, and I was like, what are they like? What's going on? Are they going to kick me out, or am I going to be brought to the hospital? Like, what's going? Of course, because we're always I'm very scared. I'm very skeptical. I'm paranoid. Like what are they concocting? Because it's all about me, right? Like, sure. But it was all about me.
It was at that point, wasn't it?
but it wasn't in the way that I thought. And anyway, she sat down next to me, and she said, hi, and she told me her name. And I said, hi, I'm Sarah. And she said, let's talk after the meeting. And what I found out later is that she actually, in her 35 years of sobriety, had never been to that meeting. Mm. She was not one of the people who was phone called.
Oh.
She happened to miss her regular meeting. She had missed the train from.
That's interesting.
So she knew about the meeting, and she obviously knew everyone who was there, because they go, in an area. I mean, there's a lot of meetings in our area so she ended up being my temporary sponsor, but she only went because she missed her regular meeting.
How about that?
So I feel like, again, God flip-flopped woman. She and I were the only women there the whole night. And there was a gentleman who I went to high school with at the meeting. And of course, thinking that was a meeting no one from my town would be at. And he was like, "Oh my gosh, Sarah." And he said my maiden name. And I was like, just like, I wanted to die. I almost left, but, I was kind of a deer in headlights because he was so happy, and
right.
I knew.
Yeah, that's a little strange when other people are happy when you're at like the rock bottom point of your life and you're in a room with people that are really kind of happy. But it also gives you some hope because you realize, okay, now those people did have the very same problem, and look at them now.
Yeah, and I believe what he said to me was, "There's nothing to be ashamed of. I was once where you're at, and I'm recovered."
Good.
And to hear the word recovered, I have to say was really important. And I know that's a word that, I've learned at this point that comes with a lot of like controversy almost.
Yeah, I like it though too. I agree with you.
I think to use that word for a newcomer can be life-saving.
Oh, very powerful.
For me, in my experience, to say recovering is kind of like, because this is what I ended up feeling like, early on, and for most of the years, until just recently, actually, that recovering is like you're always doomed with this alcoholism. And what I didn't understand was like, as the big book says, we do recover from this obsession, this allergy, this disease of alcoholism, the allergy that sets off the obsession, and then we can't stop drinking. We do recover. So in that sense, we have recovered from the insanity of the drinking.
That's how I see it. Yeah.
And then, and this is how I see it as well. And it is exactly, I'm not twisting it at all. It's exactly that in the big book. And then, but we do always have that human side, right? Where character defects, kind of stay or, can be nurtured or.
Yeah, we're always going to be hopefully growing and learning about ourselves as time goes on. And I guess you can call that recovery, or personal growth or whatever,
And that's what I do, is that's as a human, I find that I love that I can continue to evolve along spiritual lines. And I have a design for living now today. And it's, I'm 47, I'll be 48 soon. And I'm so grateful that having given this chance to live a really more peaceful, happy, joyous, and free life, and it's a life that doesn't come without problems, but, I handle them in a way that I never, ever knew how to handle the littlest problem before. And so
tell me this there, I'm kind of interested in this part of your story because most of my guests are not fond of the big book and so forth. So what interested you in this podcast? How did you learn about this podcast, and how did you become interested in this? Because it sounds like you have a fairly traditional program, which I had, for a long time, and I understand.
Well, that's another higher power. I think another, God's way of kind of leading me where I need to be led, and my willingness to keep my heart open to go in the direction I need to go to continue to grow and evolve and just keep going towards peace and joy and helping others and cleaning house. And, my 8 years in the program is uniquely my own. And I was always willing, and I knew by the time I started, this is kind of I'll try to make it abridged as possible to answer your question of how I found your podcast. Well, the short answer, I guess I'll get to it, is that, I have just recently, because of COVID, I have literally been rocketed into the fourth dimension. Because people have come into my life that would not have come into my life had COVID not occurred, because of all these Zoom meetings.
Exactly. I'm hearing that from a lot of people. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Boy, that's going to change AA, maybe, possibly.
Maybe.
For the better, hopefully.
that's my hope, and I know for me personally, it, had COVID not happened, and I did not meet people from all over the country and all over the world, which I have, and I have become very close friends with people in AA all over the country and all over the world because of the Zoom meetings, and actually also because of a podcast that I have as well. And I really am not here to promote my podcast. It's a recovery podcast, and it's not.
Do tell me about it, because I love hearing about other podcasts.
Okay. Well, it's a podcast, that it's, like I said, it's a recovery podcast. So it's, not AA specific, although interestingly, I attract people who are, that I guess, just the way I talk and the way I talk about my recovery, and the guests that I have, they just have a very spiritual kind of foundation of their recovery. And so some people there's a couple people who are not in AA, but they do have a very strong spiritual foundation. And I have, I interviewed recently an agnostic, and that's fine. So anyway, so I got in, I had been working the program of AA for, a good 5 years. And then I found and I had gone through the 12 steps and the 12 and 12, but not really thoroughly. I'd also, with another sponsor, and I had to switch sponsors because my first sponsor had a tragedy that happened in her life. And I had a mental breakdown 3 years into I really wanted to kill myself 3 years. And I was like, why do I want to kill myself 3 years into my recovery? And because I thought the steps, and
I was
doing
2 years sober, and the closest I ever came to drinking was after 2 years of sobriety. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was confused. I was very confused as to why that was happening, but I was, again, desperate. I had children. I had gotten that far. I'd seen what recovery can offer. I was liking the person that I was becoming. And, I never did formal amends at all. And so what ended up happening is I got a second sponsor, and she brought me through the steps kind of as best as she could. But I was also needing outside support. And thank God she's a sponsor who isn't she's very old school. She has 38 years, I think, a long time in recovery. And so she really, her suggestions were based on my own experiences and my own needs. And she said, what you're dealing with right now, Sarah, is something that I'm not equipped to handle. I will be your sponsor, and I will do AA stuff with you and everything. But this particular thing that you're wanting to kill yourself over, is something that I feel like professionals need. So I did. So I did EMDR therapy. I did, behavior. I did all sorts of outside. I actually went to a rehab. And, at that time I found out that you did have severe, depressive disorder and, anxiety and ADD. So, I got help for that. I got a psychiatrist. I, worked very hard with psychologists and did a lot of purging of stuff that I had never thought I needed to purge. And so, subsequently, I felt like I was, feeling again, this high of emotional sobriety. And my sponsor even told me that. She's like, you have changed so much since you first came to me. So that was a huge shift in my journey in recovery. But it was just enough that I felt God knew that I could handle at the time. So I really dove into my home group. I realized what it meant to be a part of, and not just on the periphery of meetings. I was really doing service work and getting to know people and trusting people and forming relationships with women and with men, and with, in appropriate ways, and loving my home group. And then I felt this longing, and then I had another spiritual awakening dream, which was rocked my world. And because it's AA, this is an AA podcast. I think I could probably talk about it, but the gist of this dream was, Jesus was like my best friend in this dream, and we were in a show together, and he got killed, and he ended up, I was devastated, and I never, ever before at that point, I'm Episcopalian. I've been Episcopalian my whole life. I, came into AA with resentments towards God, which at that point I'd kind of gotten over, and God was my higher power. But then I was like gifted with this Jesus dream, I call it, who I never thought much of at all. Like just another dude in the Bible. Right. And, but he was like my homeboy in the like he was my bestie in the dream. And I'm like devastated that he was killed. And then in the dream, I went into the ambulance while he was laying there, and he had his arms crossed over his heart. And I'm like, what is he holding? Like he's holding something. So I went closer and closer, and I was crying, and I was talking to him, and I was saying how much I was going to miss him. And I looked closer. I'm like, is that the Bible? Is that the Bible? And it was the big book. Wow.
Your dreams are amazing. I hardly ever even remember my dreams.
Yeah, no, I've had some, like I literally do an entirely other, like should be on a dream podcast.
I swear they're great.
Yes. And again, God gifted my higher power, gifted this dream. And so it catapulted me into this other, God knew I was ready to kind of take this journey, this even deeper spiritual journey into my recovery, this relationship with Jesus, who I like literally fell in love with Jesus. And I wouldn't call myself like a fundamentalist. I'm not a fundamentalist really with anything, except the big book. I think at this point, I really am in love with the big book and the message. And I just feel like God wrote that book. So that was like 4.5, 5 years. I had that Jesus dream, at that place of like, I, found a new sponsor who told me that I needed extra help. And, so I really was being tossed up. I was, my whole inner life was just being tossed up. I was so vulnerable. I was just really working through a lot of stuff again, and it was coming out, and I was purging. And so, I got a spiritual director. I'm like, what does this mean? Like, I don't understand what it means. But it was the big book I kept thinking about. I was like, why is it the big book? And I'm like, so the next couple of years, like I was really like diving into this. I was longing for something. Didn't really know what it was. It was something I longed for, something deeper, and I couldn't discern it. I really couldn't discern it, but I knew this dream meant something in my questioning of that longing. Like, what was it? And it has, to this day, I know why I had that dream. I know, and I understand why I had that dream. And it did bring me to the place where I am today, of understanding of why I had that dream. And the dream led me into a place of like even more open heart, like open willingness to say yes to things I said no to, and no to things I used to say yes to. I started writing, and I created a website and a recovery website, and
what's your website called?
Well, it's disbanded now. And so I tossed it. I'm like, this isn't right. It doesn't feel right. So I just dove back into my meetings, and then, but still that longing. And now to answer your question about my podcast, last December on my birthday, I all of a sudden, because I was just feeling so grateful with how I was feeling, and I just completely just surrendered to the fact that maybe, this creative place that I felt like I needed to go in, like in terms of like helping other people, like I just wanted, like wasn't working. I just said, I let go of it. Maybe the website's just, writing is just not my forte. I just wasn't feeling it. And, I'd actually been invited to be on podcasts at that point, which I was like, what? Like, cause then it was just because I was on an Instagram account on a different name. than it is today. And people, I guess, were attracted to the things that I was writing about, my own journey. And so then in December, of 2019, Sober Gratitudes, just like
Sober Gratitude. Okay.
That's my podcast. So that's like wherever you go, and I'm out. I'm like totally out.
Oh, really? Okay.
So I don't use my last name. So I go Sarah Elizabeth.
Yeah, I don't either. I keep my anonymity. Now it's been broken inadvertently before by other people, and I'm okay with it if that happens, but I do try to just be out of respect, I guess, for the traditions and so forth. I use my last name when I'm in public, whatever. But yeah.
Same.
Anyway.
Yeah. And people who know my last name know my last name.
Yeah, they know you. They know you.
But in terms of like now that I'm present in social media, not in a huge way, but
I know what you're saying, because I am too, and every once in a while, because your last name is out there on Facebook and so forth, and so every once in a while, anyway.
Yeah, and I actually closed down Facebook a couple years ago, and when I came back on, it was Sarah Elizabeth, and I actually kind of like, and this is nothing personal against some people that I was friends with, but I was accumulating friends before I was Sarah Elizabeth. That. I'm like questioning why was I needing to be them, and so I was really craving authenticity everywhere throughout my life. And so I came back onto Facebook as Sarah Elizabeth, like 3 years ago, two years ago. And then 2019, that name of the podcast came on, and I just dove in, and I felt it was like that was right. And I used the Anchor podcast platform because it was free, because I'm like, I'm not looking to make any money. I'm just to kind of use. It's
the best thing that has ever happened to me. And I love that, because I also need that creative outlet. I work in finance, and you can't really be very creative. You're not supposed to be anyway.
Right.
But so I love to have that outlet. But what it has done, as far as just opening my world up to other people and other thoughts and I've learned so much. Every single person I've talked to, Sarah, over all these years is still with me. That their stories are with me, and it's just an amazing connection. So I hope it's been a great experience for you. I think it
has.
Yeah.
It's what ended up launching me into the fourth dimension, because then that the big book talks about that I used to think was bonkers. I was like, this is weird. I'm just going to ignore that part of the big book.
And you can reach people in a very special way through that podcast. It's amazing to me still. I've kind of come to the conclusion, this is probably the most important thing that I do in my own recovery is this podcast. And it's something I love to do anyway. So it's kind of,
I'm sure I identify John, and I started it to really, truly to help other people, to give people a platform to share their stories of hope and why they love being sober and why they're grateful for being sober. So that's why Sober Gratitudes, it's a very simple. It's like the only requirement to be on my podcast is that you stop drinking alcohol and that you're grateful for it.
There you go.
It's really, there's no other requirement. And I do pre-screening too, because, I think it's important to kind of engage with a potential guest in a way where I'm like, we both feel like it's a good fit.
Wow. I got to check it out. I had no idea that you did this when I don't know, maybe I missed it but
that's okay.
Cool.
It's all right. No, I again, like I like how it's attraction rather than promotion. But I do actually, because I don't affiliate myself with AA, when I talk about my program, I usually don't say AA. I just say my program of recovery. But I ended up, I did my first season, and then at the start of COVID, I stopped. I had to focus on getting my kids all
oh my God, yeah,
learning, and my husband started working from home, and it was like just a whole new life. And thank God I'm sober and I've been sober through all this. But so then I ended up, kind of pausing, doing interviews. But then once everyone kind of got acclimated to this new way of like learning and, life, I had all this free time and I interviewed a lot more. And then I ended up closing out my first season in the middle of COVID. And it's actually one of my favorite episodes. It's my favorite episode because it's a compilation of all 24, how many episodes did I do at that point? I can't remember how many, but I took a clip from each episode.
Oh, how clever.
And it was like, the really inspiring. Yeah. And I loved it. And what's so great is I really enjoyed spending the time going through the interview and listening to what they say.
So you do your own editing and everything?
I do.
Good for you. I do too. And I get I enjoy that because I like the learning part of it, but also when you go through that editing process, you learn so much about the person. I mean, because you really listen to that story. I mean, that's so helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I tell you, I have learned so much from all my guests, and I sometimes I get moved to tears. Often I have been moved to tears that I think, like, I would think, oh my gosh, I been doing this for selfish reasons because I feel like I'm the one who's being helped. And I don't know who I don't have a huge following. I'm not looking to be famous. I'm not looking for any of that, but I'm just looking to help it. But since then, I've realized, what, I do know that there are people who do get help from, and hearing the stories, I could tell you stories that have happened that are just unbelievable stories of people who have actually surrendered, finally listening to one of my episodes. And so the last episode of my first season, it's a thank you episode. That's what I call it. So I'm thanking all because I love them all. Like they shared their hearts and souls, and they were vulnerable, and they were really honest.
That's a really good idea. That was a good idea to do that. I like that concept.
Thank you. Yeah. Again, it just like, I don't know how that just came to me, but I feel this. So this is a creative outlet for me. I love it. I love the top. I love talking about recovery. I love talking about AA. So that's why when I saw your podcast, I'm like, I feel like that because I used to do a lot of speaker meetings before COVID, and I haven't really had the chance to do that. And I listened to a couple of your episodes, and I'm like, I feel so at home at AA. So, I'm just like wanting just an opportunity where I could meet somebody, and know the audience was also AA, but I ended up in COVID. I know, for time, I don't know if you have time restraints here in your episodes, but one of my guests, I found on Instagram and really was drawn to this guest is totally anonymous, like wrote a book, thought the book was amazing, was really attracted to this person who was very anonymous. So I texted this person and I said, I really love the content of your Instagram. I have this podcast. Would you be interested in being a guest? And we started to communicate, and I'm thinking I'm talking with a woman.
Uh-huh.
And so I said, I don't even, after like getting to know this person, and this is before I did like more thorough pre-screening, like this kind of pre-screening where we see each other. I said, I don't even know your name. Like, my name, because I have it on my Instagram. Like, what's your name? Thinking I was going to hear like Betty, Susie. And it gave me a guy's name. And I'm like, wait a minute, you're a dude? I'm like, what the heck? And so this dude, was on my podcast, and we became friends. Like, he's just has such a great program of recovery. He's completely anonymous. And then, I was like, darn it, I'd really love to know this person, like get to know this person better. But I respect his anonymity like that. I really respect that, and want to honor that. But then COVID happened, and he reached out to me and he said, I'm going to be doing a Zoom meeting. Do you want to join? And I was like, I get a chance to meet this person who I think has such an incredible it's like I wanted what he had, and so in this meeting it was wonderful. Like and it still goes on. It's a wonderful meeting. And then he took it a step further and brought how he has like 30 plus years in the program. And he ended up doing a Zoom big book study.
Oh, okay.
He invited me to that. And I went through it. I finished it a couple of weeks ago, and I cannot believe what I was missing. And what I learned is, that I had not thoroughly gone through the steps ever. But I also think that I wasn't ready to because it can be for somebody like me who has a lot of trauma and stuff in my past, and it was hard to be not. It was hard to not.
Yeah, I agree. You have to take it in little bits and pieces sometimes, I think,
Yeah, and I'm very much. I honor like addiction. I'm sorry. I very much trauma and addiction. That's becoming a big part of my mission. Is that's like a whole other level in which I think AA. And I do think there's a lot of places AA does really honor that. Like my sponsor honored that. That's something that AA is not equipped to really handle in your situation. So I think there are special, like I said before.
Well, I'm learning from my friend and co-host Angela just what a big deal trauma is in making it more likely for a person to become an addict later on. So it's a huge part, and trauma is, I guess it runs on a spectrum of, from, I know that I had trauma, but it wasn't, it was a different sort of trauma than other people have, but it was trauma nonetheless. But anyway.
And what I've learned, and when you, in the beginning, before we started recording, you said, what do you want us to talk about a topic? And the first thing that came up was trauma. But then I'm like, I'm not sure if I want to focus completely on that.
There were so many things, by the way, that you brought up in this podcast that could have been topics in themselves. You mentioned that you talked a lot about the inventory process and about what you learned about yourself and the patterns that you learned from yourself. That was a huge thing for me too. Of everything that I've done in AA, I think that's what I've gotten the most benefit from, is having that understanding of myself, and not even just having that understanding, but learning how to go through that process, because I continue to do that process whenever I'm in having some sort of a problem in my life, and that's just huge. And I also find it interesting that you do find value in the big book. Now, I have an interesting relationship with the big book, because I was, I don't know if you've heard all my story, but I went through a period of time where I was going to this group where we studied the big book and always into it all the time. But then after some time in the program, I came out as an atheist, and all of a sudden people were using that big book in a different way to try to kind of put me in my place, So I had to kind of put that aside, that book, for a little while, but I still find value in it. In fact, I was reading some of it yesterday, and just to get ready for a podcast. And I said, there's some pretty good stuff in there. There's some pretty good stuff in there. So I think it's important, because it is an old book, and there are people that don't relate to it, so well. But there is some value in reading it, and it does describe an alcoholic pretty well,
Right. And, what I learned things about it that I never understood, and I was kind of anti-big book, which is, yeah, and I think it's because over the years, and I'm pretty confident just with what I've learned through this study that I experienced most recently, is that the message has been tangled, and how I went through it was like a detanglement of the message, and the detanglement to literally like going through it as it's like word for word. It's like there was no, and when you said, you felt like it was used as kind of like
it was it became a law book.
No, and that's not what the founders didn't want that.
Oh, I know. I'm starting to think, this might be a good podcast in and of itself, is just talking about the value that you can find in the big book. I mean, because it's just really, really interesting, especially when I'm meeting younger people, and especially women who have some difficulty identifying with it, with the language in the book. But if you do put it in its historical context, and you can anyway. That's
yes. I mean, I was like kind of, oh, it's all about heat. Like this is so. I can't believe it. But at this point, like I've just pushed it aside, and that's not what's most important about what you can really benefit from the big book. And, for me personally, like the biggest thing that I learned, like I said earlier, is that through the sex inventory, and it's not the same way for everyone, but for me, the kind of being rocketed into the fourth dimension, it occurred for me when I was going through the sex inventory, and I realized my patterns in relationships. And then I realized, holy shit, for my whole life, I've been really very selfish without knowing I was being selfish. And even like with my best intentions in sobriety, I'd been selfish. Like even in like beforehand, like trying to make amends with somebody, but I was doing it in a very manipulative kind of way. So that's not how the big book suggests that you do it or recommend that you do it. And so now, I see myself in a way that I see myself with a brand new set of eyes today. Like I feel like I've been like born just a few weeks ago almost, but I know it's just like it's like this other juncture I'm at in terms of my sobriety, where COVID, like I said yes to all the right things during COVID, and then COVID brought me to a place where I could go. I knew I had a kind of longing for the big book. I didn't know what it was, and this is what it was. It stopped me right in my tracks in the rooms of Zoom, and I was able to learn exactly what the big book's all about, and that I no longer, I see the benefit of telling a newcomer I'm a recovered alcoholic. I'm not a perfect person by any means. And I'm so relieved. Yeah. Like I'm so relieved that I can let go of that. Like that I'm not that. Thank God for the 10th step, like, cause I can go through my day. If I'm not sure of like a thought or action, or if I'm like, I did something that was mean, I can immediately make an amends. And I can, after I, kind of go to the throne, I then go to the phone. And, so that I have the 10th step there for me, cause some people think, oh, I did my 4th step. I did all my inventory. So why am I still irritable and discontent? Like, why am I? And for me, I think it was largely due to the fact that I didn't fully understand that my alcoholism is the allergy that I have, the disease of alcoholism that I have, the allergy I have to alcohol, where I take a sip and then it kicks off the obsession to drink, and then I can't stop. That is completely separate from my humanism. And so the big book really, steps 3 through 9, are like any human can be brought through.
I agree.
And so that being said, we all have the opportunity to learn about our patterns, like our selfish patterns in life, so that we can think of others before ourselves. In the world today, like we are consumers, we are so selfish. We're so like we want. And now to be relieved, like to know what it means to be in self. Like I didn't know when I was being in self. Like I gave that example, of like manipulating a 9th step, that it didn't work. I was like, why didn't it work? Well, because I wanted this person to be like me, because I thought I had the right way of behaving and being. but that's really selfish, you know? So like, I can't, like, I'm me and you are you. And so that now I've learned as it's laid out there, word for word in the big book, exactly what I can do to live a happy, joyous, and free life. And,
well, I have to say, that's how I got sober. That's how I did it. So, this has really been an interesting conversation. I'm so glad that I got to meet you, and I'm definitely going to check out your podcast, Sober Gratitude.
Sober Gratitude. Yeah. And anywhere you go, like if you Google it, you'll find a website that's Sober Gratitudes, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. You know, and it's really just it's kind of like a AA anonymous way of being helpful, you know, like to do, just to inspire others. And my tagline is, celebrating the hope in recovery. That's what I love to do every day, is celebrate the hope in recovery.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Sarah. I really enjoyed the conversation. And that's it for another episode of AA Beyond Belief, the podcast. Thank you for listening. If you would like to help out our website and podcast, you can do so by becoming a patron on patreon.com/AA Beyond Belief, or visiting our website and clicking on the donate button and donating through paypal.me. But, you know, a lot of people right now don't have a lot of money, and that's totally okay. If you are not able to contribute, we're going to be just fine anyway. And thank you very much for listening. And thank you, Sarah, for joining us here on AA Beyond Belief.